Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. So happy you can join me. This is always a fun one because I get tremendous reaction. I'd say 75% of it negative when I do for the one time of the year when I rank the teams 1 to 32. And that's what I did this week in my Football Morning in America column. I'm joined by my friend from NBC Sports, Paul Burmeister. And to let you know sort of the format of this podcast, it's going to be a little bit different. First of all, later in the podcast, after Paul and I batted around a bit, we're going to be joined by Denver General Manager George Payton. And we will discuss a very productive offseason for the Denver Broncos. And until then, the way we're going to do this is we're literally going to go from 1 to 32. And there are 7 teams in my rankings who, for better or for worse, for positive or for negative, have gotten the most reaction from their fan bases about where I have ranked those specific teams. So, Paul, I'm going to let you take over and walk me through this, but thanks for joining me. And this is going to be our last podcast for 2 months. So let's make it a Jim Dandy one.
Jim Dandy. I sent my kids out the door today, Peter, telling them they had less than a month left of school. It's basically the last day of school for the two of us right here as far as your podcast is concerned. And I feel like I'm in podcast co-host for the NFL Position A here recently because Chris Sims is in the midst of his top 40 quarterback rankings. That's always fun to bat around for an hour. And we had your mock draft a while ago, but to be honest, I like this even better. You're 1 through 32. So you've given us some very good fodder. I'm all ready to roll. I've got your top 32. Without any further ado, should we start it from the top?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go.
Okay. At number 1, I guess no real surprise. I can't think of a team in recent memory, Peter, that really kind of garnered more respect and attention from a playoff loss than the Buffalo Bills, and that's your number 1 team.
I mean, to me, Paul, it just, I think this is about the easiest one that I've done in some time, looking at teams and, looking at the 32 teams at this time of year. And I think the reason why it seems so easy is that Buffalo has just made all the right moves. And I don't know anybody who looked at the end of last season and said, oh my God, the Bills have so much more to go. The Bills were close. And look, I think like everybody else thinks, they were missing one thing. They were missing a really good pass rusher, probably missing some secondary depth. They went out and got Von Miller and then drafted Kaiir Elam. And look, Von Miller has not had a double-digit sack year in 4 years. So there's some question mark about whether he can be Von Miller. And I think what Sean McDermott is going to have to do is limit his playing time to make sure that he can be around for 17 games.
From a team that many thought was the best team in the postseason last year, even though they lost to an AFC team that didn't even make the playoffs, this is one of the teams we're going to spend a nice little amount of time with. At number 2, Peter, you have the LA Chargers.
Every year I try to do 3 or 4 things in here that are just gut feels on my part. I responded to a couple of people yesterday. I sent emails back for people who had real thoughtful letters about how can you do this or how can you do that. And I wrote back and I basically said the easiest thing to do would be to take last year's standings and just put teams down in order of how they finished last year. But does it ever really happen that way? No. There's always a, Carolina of 2015 or, there's always some team that really kind of disrupts the usual order of things. My feeling about the Chargers this year is that I think if they had a better defense last year, Paul, I think they would have been a better team than the Chiefs last year. And I mean, and that's, look, you can say if whatever, if there's a lot of ifs you could say. But I do think that the Chargers addressed so many needs in this offseason. They addressed it with 2 run stuffers on the defensive front, particularly Sebastian Joseph Day. They've got another pass rusher in Khalil Mack, who, again, like Von Miller, you're not sure how much he has left, but I think he's got at least a year or 2 of productive play left. And you got the best cornerback in free agency in J.C. Jackson, which they needed too. So to me, this was a powerful, strong off-season for general manager Tom Telesco. And I think the Chargers have gotten significantly better. I think the Chiefs, who I have at number 3, have taken a little bit of a step back, not a massive one. And putting them number 3 really was about in Mahomes we trust. But I think that the Chargers have done enough. I feel better about them in a great division than I do about any other team in that division.
You mentioned the Chiefs at 3, Peter. I want to get there in a second, but just a little more on the Chargers. I mean, to me, this one made me smile, Peter. And I think a lot of fans, if you're not attached to a team in the AFC West, probably have a similar kind of feeling, because if you're of an age, there's a certain air of nostalgia here that you think back to the Air Coryell days of the Chargers. And it was just a wonderful watch. I mean, they may not have gone too far in the playoffs. They went pretty far sometimes. But to think about the Chargers hanging around and being a player in January is fun with the way they play with Justin Herbert. I see a couple of things that have to happen. Justin Herbert, top 6 or 7, top 5 quarterback in the league. Can he go to number 3? I think that's a fair question, to being in the top 3 QBs in the league. And that defense that was average to poor, can it be top 10-ish? Not top 5, but somewhere in the top 10. And I could see this number 2 playing out.
Hey, look, Brandon Staley walked into the Rams a couple of years ago, and by the end of the year as defensive coordinator in his only year there, and look, he made some changes. He did some different things. They ended up being the best defense in football that year. I think he knows how to do it. He knows how to create it. And now I think he has the pieces. There's one other little interesting thing that I note about the Chargers. Paul, in weeks 3, 4, 7, and 8 for the Chargers, in those games, 3, 4, 7, and 8, they have what might be 4 of the lowest 5 or 6 teams in the NFL. Jacksonville, Houston, Seattle, and Atlanta. And I realize Seahawks fans just choked on their apples, but I think Seattle's going to take a major step back. But anyway, they've got 4 games that, I mean, honestly, I'll be surprised if they don't go 4-0 in those 4 games. If they do, that basically gives them the sort of buffer to know that you're going to be, either in first place or very close to it by December 1st in a very tough division. So look, I'm not positive about the Chargers. It's just a gut feeling I've had watching him through the offseason. I think they've answered a lot of questions.
And you already kind of gave this one away, Peter. We stay in the AFC West as we go from 2 to 3. Kansas City Chiefs there as the 3rd best team. What's your headline with that one?
I wrote something in my column, Paul, about how one year when I went to Eagles training camp, I don't know, 2005, 6, 7, something like that. And I remember telling Andy Reid that, these fans here, they were still having training camp at Lehigh up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And so I said to Andy Reid, I said, these fans, there are 8 or 10,000 people there that day. These fans are so lucky because every year they come here and they know that if things go right, you could go to the Super Bowl. And that is what I would want out of my team if I were a fan of a team. And that's kind of the way I feel about this Kansas City team. And what I mean is that, okay, they lost Tyreek Hill. But is there any doubt in your mind, Paul, that if things go right for this team, if everything goes well, if they don't have major injuries, if Justin Reed can step in for Tyrann Mathieu, they're still going to be really good. And so that's the team that Andy Reid and Brett Veach have built. And even though this might be a little bit of a step back year, it's not going to be much of one.
I think you hit it right on the head there, Peter. It wouldn't be a surprise at all, as long as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are there, to see this team around being one of the best teams in the league by the time we get to the end of the year, or even winning it all. I think it's also pretty easy to play the other side, Peter, that if you take a step back and ask yourself, okay, who's the player the team's worried about the most when they play the Chiefs? Plenty of people with an opinion you listen to would say Tyreek Hill, and they're without him. I don't doubt that they're going to be really, really good, but if you wanted to play the other side, you can say, okay, without that piece, the one that teams worried about the most defensively, he's gone. I can see how you would say, okay, maybe a team took a step back because Tyreek Hill was that good and meant that much to the teams trying to get ready to play him.
Yeah. Paul, it was interesting. Everybody likes the AFC better right now today overall than the NFC. I get it. But after Kansas City, it was really tough. This was easily the toughest thing I did, and it was almost a coin flip. The Rams, the Packers, and the Bucks. I knew I've had a feeling I was going to put them 4, 5, and 6 in some order. That's how they fell. Rams, Packers, Bucks. I'll give you a little bit of reasoning on each, and then let's get your reaction. The Rams lost a lot. I mean, a lot. I think Sebastian Joseph Day's a loss. Obviously, Von Miller's a loss. It looks like Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be a loss. Even if he goes back, he's not going to be there for 3/4 of the season. Andrew Whitworth, Robert Woods, they've lost a lot of valuable pieces. But I look at them and I say, okay, what's left? The two most important players on offense, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp. The two most important players on defense, Aaron Donald coming back and Jalen Ramsey. And I just said to myself, with all due respect to all those other players, and they will miss them, no question about it. But I just think when you start with that core and build around it, I just thought, boy, it's hard for me not to pick the Rams as the best team in the NFC entering the season. Now, the one thing, Paul, that everybody needs to understand is I've got the Packers number 5, and the Packers probably have the best chance again to win home field because they've got 6 games against Chicago, Detroit, and Minnesota. You would think, wouldn't you, that they're going 5-1 in their division. And it's going to be hard for the Rams to go 5-1 in their division. It's going to be hard for the Bucks to go 5-1 in their division, even though the Bucks have Atlanta and Carolina. The Bucks can't beat the Saints. So I basically picked the team 5th in Green Bay without Devontae Adams that I still think probably has the best chance to get home field in the NFC. And that's why I'm still, even though the last 2 playoff campaigns for Green Bay, I'm very, very down on them for, especially the performance against the Niners last year. And then number 6, I put Tampa Bay there. Tampa Bay is going to be really good, I think. But there's something in my head. I can't look at 45-year-old Tom Brady and assume that he's going to be as great as he was last year. I think he will be, but there's just something starting to gnaw at me. That plus the fact they replace both guards on a very solid offensive front, and we don't know yet if Rob Gronkowski is back, and we don't know yet when Chris Godwin is coming back. And remember, the last 2 full games that Godwin played before getting his torn ACL, he had 25 catches from Tom Brady. And remember one other thing, Paul, for those who say, Godwin was hurt a long time ago, he'll be back. Just remember one thing. He had his ACL surgery the first week of January. So I'm not assuming at all that he's going to be fine by Columbus Day or even by Halloween. We just don't know about when he's going to be back and how good he's going to be when he's going to be back. And so that's the order, 4, 5, 6. It sounds logical, but there's a very good chance it'll go 6, 5, 4 or something like that.
My number one feeling, Peter, about this NFC swing of Rams 4, Packers 5, Bucs 6 is about the Packers. And you mentioned it a little bit with how they've stubbed their toe the last couple of playoff seasons. I sat there and stared at those three and tried to think of some kind of pushback, something to say, those teams shouldn't be there. My number one thought, a lot to like about Green Bay, but I can't get past how they've done in the postseason the last couple of years. They haven't been just a little bit lesser than the regular season. They've been couple standard deviations away. So that's my number one thought as you intro your top NFC teams, that the Packers defense is getting better. Aaron Rodgers still wonderful. I don't have the belief in them I had a few months ago based off of this postseason pattern.
Paul, I feel, as we move on, I feel a little bit, I had a tough time with what I was going to do with Cincinnati. I like Cincinnati. I like Cincinnati a lot. There's just something holding me back from loving Cincinnati again. As I wrote, just remember that when you look at Cincinnati, the one thing that sticks out in my mind is recent history. In the last 27 seasons, only one Super Bowl loser has gone on the next year to make it back to the Super Bowl. And That was the Patriots of 4 years ago, who lost to the Eagles and then went and beat the Rams the next year. So I don't know. That says something to me. I don't think it's the absolute be-all, end-all story, but it says something to me, number one. Number two, I can't and look, it was a magic season for the Bengals. And Evan McPherson was just as magical as Joe Burrow was. So I just think that I wouldn't call it good luck. You make your own luck. And plus they had to win all those games on the road. So, after beating the Raiders at home. But I just have this feeling about the Bengals that they're probably going to take a little step back, not a major step back. And at the same time, I think that their division just really got a lot harder because, the Browns, if Deshaun Watson plays, will be significantly better. And the Ravens, with all their players back after being the team most wiped out due to injury last year. I wrote something in my thing about the Ravens. If you think about it, the four players on their team this year with the biggest cap numbers, okay? Lamar Jackson, Ronnie Stanley, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters. All those four players were gone by December last year and missed. Ronnie Stanley missed all but one game. Marcus Peters missed the whole year. And then Marlon Humphrey and Lamar Jackson missed either the last 4 or 5 games of the season. So the Ravens were 8-3, and it looked like they were a lock for the playoffs heading into December, and they never won another game. So I think the Ravens, just simply by virtue of health, assuming that they don't have these absolute freak training camp injuries again like they had last year, I think they're going to be right there with Cincinnati. So that was a tough one for me, 8-9. Or 7-8. But that sort of was my thought process with putting Baltimore as high as I did. And a lot of people said, you're nuts for putting Baltimore so high. I don't think so at all. I think Baltimore, with reasonable health, is going to win 11 games, period. They might win more. And any team that goes 11-6 is going to be a top 10 team in the NFL.
I know the reaction to the Ravens at 8, that was probably quite a reaction for you with all of your social media accounts there. I would think the same at number 9, Peter. Let's move north on 95. Yeah. The Eagles at number 9. Great story last year. They really put it back together, became a playoff team, but they didn't look like one the first portion of the season. What's the reaction been to Philadelphia being there in the top 10?
I mean, I have a lot of Dallas Cowboy weirdos on my various timelines. And, the fact that I have the Cowboys in the middle of the pack, because as I said, it's always something in Dallas. I don't know. Something's going to happen. It always does. But I look at Philadelphia and I look at improvements all over the roster, starting with A.J. Brown. I think that is a major upgrade. I think he's a top 5 to 7 NFL wide receiver. And now, you put him with, Devontae Smith, obviously. That's a great pairing. But also, Quez Watkins and Zach Pascal. Zach Pascal, I'm high on, the free agent from Indianapolis. I think that was a good addition. And then, obviously you look at the defensive side of the ball. Hassan Reddick and James Bradbury add legitimacy to the front and back end of your defense. And look, I realize this shouldn't come into play. It really shouldn't. But we don't know about Jalen Hurts, Paul. None of us know about Jalen Hurts. But I will just say this. Howie Roseman has left himself with an extra 1 in next year's draft. They have New Orleans' first-round pick next year. And though it's not likely to be very high, and I don't think their pick is going to be very high either, Howie Roseman will be in position, if need be, with 6 picks in the first 2 rounds of the next 2 drafts. Okay? He'll be in position, if he needs to go buy a quarterback. So I think that they've managed the present and the future well.
Look, I think no matter who you have as kind of that next best team in the NFC, after that top 3, and you had 4, 5, 6, Rams, Packers, Buccaneers, whatever order you have those top 3, the next team is a ways behind. I think it's bold to have Philadelphia next based off of the difference we saw between the Buccaneers and the Eagles last year in the playoffs. But there are a lot of things to like about them for sure. Let's say in the NFC, your next team, your last team in the top 10, the 49ers, that I would imagine a number of people have reached out to you and let you know both their positive feeling and negative feeling about the Niners with that unknown at quarterback, having them there at 10.
Look, I think everybody wonders whether they're going to have a competent year at quarterback or better. And last year, you would have to say that it was a competent year or maybe a little bit less than that. So, look, and this is kind of damning with faint praise. But if Trey Lance plays this year for the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo in reserve, that to me is the best option for the Niners. I still think there's a very good chance Garoppolo goes somewhere. But I also think that Trey Lance, and again, this is going to sound almost cruel, but if Trey Lance can't be better than Jimmy Garoppolo was last year, or at least as good, the 49ers are in real trouble because it's going to say something about their evaluation process going into the 2021 draft, and it's going to say something, obviously, about Trey Lance. So, and that's why I think everybody's saying, oh, my God, Trey Lance. It's not like Jimmy Garoppolo last year was a top 5 quarterback. He played efficiently, and he didn't turn it over very much, and that is that's good because in the playoff game against the Packers, that got them a win. But you don't want that to be your absolute total, let's settle for that. You want to try to get better. And that's why I think the 49ers are going to be at least as good at quarterback this year than they were last year, and that's why I put him number 10.
As you said, Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't a top 5 quarterback last year. I do think he was a lot of the times, but somewhere between 10 and 15-ish. So he played pretty well. And for Trey Lance, if he can hit the ground running in that area, it's best case scenario. I think that the best news for that team is they're so good around Trey Lance, offense and defense, especially if they can figure out the Deebo Samuel thing. He can be lesser than Jimmy Garoppolo was for that first half of last year, and they can still have a winning record and be right there to make a run after Thanksgiving. Let's make it 3 NFC teams in a row. At 11, you have the Saints without Sean Payton.
This is going to be tough. I mean, I think there are people out there who are just assuming they're going to be fine without Payton. A lot of pressure, on this offense to be as imaginative and as good without Sean Payton. So we'll see if they can be. I mean, one of the reasons that Jameis Winston desperately wanted to go to the Saints is that he wanted some of those brain cells of Sean Payton, and now that's gone. I think if you look at their receiving core with Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry, it's monumentally better than it was a year ago. They already have a top 5 NFL defense, in my opinion, and most of that is coming back. So I like the Saints' chances to give the Bucs a tough time winning the NFC South.
Big drop at number 12, Peter, for the team in the AFC that finished as the number 1 seed in that conference last year. We see Tennessee at 12.
I look, this year is going to be a referendum on Ryan Tannehill. The cap hit on Tannehill won't be awful if they choose at the end of this year to get rid of him. They've had a very stiff upper lip this offseason and been all in Ryan Tannehill's corner, but come on, let's be real. The last 2 playoff games for the Titans, both of them, by the way, in Nashville, Ryan Tannehill has led the offense to 29 points and 2 losses. So, you can't be scoring 16 and 13 when you're the number 1 seed in the AFC and think all is well. All's not well. Ryan Tannehill has got to play a lot better than he has, Paul.
Yeah, especially when it matters most. All those nice games he has middle of the season aren't going to mean a whole lot if they don't do better in the offseason. At 13, we find a team, new GM, new head coach, new best player on offense, maybe tied with Derek Carr. Raiders at 13.
Here was the thing about the Raiders that was difficult for me. I think their defense is going to be okay. And they made an awful lot of good additions this offseason. I love Chandler Jones, Max Crosby rushing together. The explosiveness on offense with Devontae Adams added with his old friend Derek Carr. I really, really like that a lot. And I just think they've got a tough schedule. Anybody in that division's got a tough schedule. And along with Denver, which I have next at 14, I think one of the difficult things to really try to figure out coming into this season, Paul, is, Denver had a very good defense last year. The Raiders not as good. And, have the Raiders basically caught up now? And can they play on a par with Denver on defense? And so I think that is going to be big. And look, the Chandler Jones addition is big, and I think it is really, really close between the Raiders and Denver, and that's why I had them back to back.
Yeah, Denver. I mean, it's one of many compliments you can give to the AFC West that the Broncos come in at 14, Peter, and they're the last team in that division. But it is probably 8 to 10 spots higher than they would have been last year. So a massive jump with Russell Wilson, right, but not good. Yeah, not good enough to be anywhere but 4th in that division. Okay, a lot of people will want to hear about the Cowboys at number 15. We've already seen the Eagles. They were just inside the top 10. Your biggest reason you have Dallas there at 15, Peter?
I think Dallas, not only does Dallas always lead the league in drama, as I said, but I didn't love how they played in some big spots last year. I think it's a pretty basic thing with the season on the line that you know how to manage the clock. And that last snap of last season against the 49ers in the playoffs just really sticks with me, Paul. It's hard to erase. And you could say, well, that can happen to any team. It can happen any year. Maybe. Paul, am I wrong here? Does it always happen to Dallas? Is there always something that goes wrong in Dallas? Is there always some big Tuesday headline 3 or 4 weeks out of the season that bleeds into Wednesday and Thursday? And I mean, the amazing thing about that clock management story last year after the 49ers knocked the Cowboys out of the playoffs is that we're in the middle of the playoffs, and that story lasted till Friday. Nothing lasts 4 days, 5 days in the playoffs. That thing had so many legs that even in the offseason, people are still talking about it. And I'm sorry, I just can't get it out of my head.
Everything's amplified with America's team, Peter. I mean, I think they have to take the good with the bad. I mean, there's a reason why, even if they have a losing record, it's rare that they come into December and they're not factors. They're still going to get a lot of 425 kicks. They're still going to get some prime time because of the Dallas Cowboys. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But they also have this thing where they're pretty good and they're flirting with being good a lot. And there's something that comes up that keeps them just decent instead of really good. So I'm with you. It feels like there's always a reason why Dallas, people are questioning what happened as opposed to applauding. Miami at 16, Peter. So one game above 500 last year. Okay, last team in the top half of the league in your power rankings here would suggest that even with Tyreek Hill, pretty much the same as they were last year.
Paul, I originally, late Saturday night when I was doing this, I had New England 16 and Miami 17. And I ended up flipping them because of the way each team ended the season. Miami ended up on a hot streak, even though they fired their head coach. And New England ended up losing 4 of the last 5, including the playoff game in Buffalo, in which they were behind 33-3 midway through the third quarter. And I looked at Mac Jones, and I don't know. I mean, I thought Mac Jones regressed a little bit as the season went on last year. He started well. I had a stat in my column. I think in his first 11 games, he was a 69% passer. And then down the stretch, he was a 61% passer. And Paul, I'm talking about Miami and New England like in tandem. And there's another thing, almost like Dallas, I just can't get over. There are 2 coaches on the offensive side of the ball, Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, who their history is not on the offensive side of the ball. And neither of them, in more than 3 decades of coaching, neither of them have ever been a quarterback coach. And now Joe Judge apparently is going to have basically quarterback coach duties with the Patriots, and Matt Patricia is going to have something to do with it, although in Bill Belichick's world, who knows? And so that bothers me. And then on the other side, I mean, in Miami, I look at Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Mike Gesicki. And look, I have the same questions most people do about Tua Tagovailoa. I'm not sure of him at all. And I don't necessarily think that they're going to be looking for a quarterback at the end of this season, but they might be. But all I'm saying is that the weapons that he has in his arsenal are fantastic compared to most teams in the league, and certainly, I think, compared to the Patriots. So that's why I ended up putting Miami over New England.
Look at your AFC East turn there, Peter, that back-to-back, Dolphins 16, Patriots 17. And my number one thought is people are going to have opinions about the Patriots, so that they should be higher or lower. But the bottom line for me is whether you'd have them at 12 or 13 or 18 or 19, this appears to be a team that's kind of chasing the elite teams in the AFC. And that feels different about the Patriots, considered
Agreed.
what we've been doing the last 20 years. And that's why it jumps out. But if you're really realistic about this, there's somewhere, they're not a bad team, but I don't think you could say they're a top 10 team competing with the best in the AFC. So they certainly belong in that pack. It's a decent AFC team. And if whoever coaches Mac Jones can bring him along to make that big step, maybe they're top 10, but I think you have them right where they belong. Let's go with Cleveland right now at 18.
I don't have any idea whether Cleveland will be 18 or 8 or 23, because you have to tell me how much is Deshaun Watson playing. You know, the difference between Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett, his backup, is pretty big, assuming they don't figure out some sort of Hail Mary to bring Baker Mayfield back if Deshaun Watson gets, a heavy suspension by the NFL. Fact is, the Browns at 18, it's almost a placeholder, Paul. I don't know what to do with them because I don't know how much the quarterback's going to play. If you told me that the quarterback is playing, 16 or 17 games, I'd probably have him at 10 or 12, but you can't tell me that. Nobody can. And that's why the Browns were a hard team to place.
I think you said it best. They're placeholder at 18. Good spot for them with all the unknowns we have right now. Minnesota, veteran defensive coach to a young offensive one. You have the Vikings at 19.
There's a lot of fresh air in Minnesota. You can just feel it. I think that Mike Zimmer had gotten stale in Minnesota. A lot of players thought he'd become way too negative, sullen. And so I think they needed what I call a sunny guy, Kevin O'Connell, and a new general manager, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. And I think they have brought really some fresh air to an organization that needed it. As always, Paul, in Minnesota, it's going to come down to Kirk Cousins. They have enough talent to win on both sides of the ball. They're not great on either side of the ball, but they have enough talent to win, and it's going to be in the hands of Kirk Cousins to take them as far as they go.
Speaking of sunny outlooks here, Peter, and the NFC North, how dare you have an optimistic look at a team that's historically been bad in the Detroit Lions and won only 3 games last year? What's the reaction been to having Detroit at 20?
You're out of your effing mind. That's you want to know the easy the reaction. The next 2 teams on my list, Detroit 20, Indianapolis 21. That has been borderline overwhelming. The Lions way too high, Colts way too low. We'll get to the Colts in a minute. Look, there's a few things about the Lions that I like. Number one, they played their rear ends off for Dan Campbell in hopeless situations. They won their last 3 home games last year, and they played hard for him, although there was nothing to play for. I was very impressed with what I saw in them late in the year. Number 2, this team was 11-6 against the spread last year. I'm not a betting man, but I know what that means. And that means they outperformed public expectations. And when I say public expectations, I mean the people in Vegas and now all over the country who study this game, as much as anybody does. And they made this incredibly good run last year. And I think one of the things that happened last year is that they made believers out of people inside their team. And I just think that Detroit now is, and there's one other thing, and a lot of people would say, boy, you got Detroit on the schedule, that's lucky. Listen to the 8 games that they have on their schedule, okay? Giants, Jets, Carolina, Jacksonville, Washington, Seattle, Chicago. And look, and I think Detroit, I look at Detroit right now as clearly a better team today at this moment than Chicago. Whether that pans out or not, I don't know. But half of Detroit's schedule, are absolutely, totally winnable games. And if you put a line on them right now, it would be less than a touchdown in every one of those games. And so, again, I want to pick a team or two every year that I think is going to outperform expectations. Detroit's my big one. I mean, putting them 20 is not exactly like putting them 8th. No, but the Chargers at 2 and Detroit at 20, those are my two teams this year.
I love the subplots, Peter. And one of my favorite ones heading into this year is Jared Goff. And I mean, think about what he's been through the last year. He got sent packing. He had to watch the team that said, okay, I think we could go from decent to the best without you. And they were terrific without him. And he goes to a team that historically loses. They lost a lot. Is he going to be the man there? Or is this the start of a kind of an Andy Dalton kind of trek where he's going to be with 4 teams in 5 years as a trusted backup? So I can't wait to see what happens there. I love the collegiate feel Dan Campbell has created there as the head coach. I want to see if that translates to wins too. I also can't wait to hear about the Colts at 21. I expected to see them quite a bit higher than this. What's your number one reason for having them in the early 20s?
Look, this as awkward as this sounds, okay, because I do believe that Matt Ryan is an upgrade on Carson Wentz. I really do. I still don't know exactly how Matt Ryan is going to play. And Matt Ryan has always had the ability to throw a good deep ball. Last year, his lowest yards per attempt in 8 years at only 7.1 yards per attempt. The receiving core in Indianapolis is just okay. And I think this is going to be a team that is going to need to rely a lot on Jonathan Taylor the way it did last year. They need a really good season from Matt Ryan to be competitive with Tennessee. And they might be, they could be. At the end of the day, Paul, although I think there's a decent chance they're going to be better than last year, I have given the Colts the benefit of the doubt almost every year. And I've really liked the Colts. And every year, even though it's never a disaster, it's, something kind of falls short. And they've been a winning team with all the quarterback mayhem under Frank Reich. But they have really come up short in some games, obviously against Jacksonville last year being the biggest of that. And I think for them to beat Tennessee, it's a lot bigger step than I think most people think. And I think they have to get a major upgrade at quarterback in Matt Ryan over Carson Wentz. And although deep down I believe he's better, I guess I just need to see it. I need to see it. And I will not be surprised if by the end of the year they're 10th or 11th in the eyes of many people around the league. I won't be surprised. But I don't know. It's just hard for me to get excited about them.
You started me right down the road I wanted to go to when I thought about Indianapolis there at 21, Peter. It's a good time to remind people, Phillip Rivers played well 2 years ago. He didn't play at a Pro Bowl level, but he did a nice job and had a really good year. Carson Wentz, I know it's easy to go to the way that the year finished. He was terrible at Jacksonville. There's a lot of intangibles to what he did or didn't do there in Indianapolis that people want to bring up. He played really well most of last year to get them in position. So Matt Ryan, to be an upgrade, he needs to move into the great kind of season because they've had good quarterback play the last couple of years. We'll see if Matt can deliver great. Another surprise, Arizona at 22, Peter.
I don't know. It has felt like a weird and crummy offseason for the Arizona Cardinals. Coming right off the bat, coming off a lousy end of season for Kyler Murray. He starts talking about, I want a new contract. I don't want to play this year for $5 million. I don't blame him. But I don't think he's going to play on that contract. They've got to get something done this offseason. But there seemed to be a lot of bad public blood between the two sides, and you don't want that with your franchise quarterback. Now, you might say that Hollywood Brown for Christian Kirk is a little bit of an upgrade. Okay, but how much of an upgrade is missing for the first 6 games of the year? Probably the best player on your team in DeAndre Hopkins, and I don't know. That's, as I said in the column, that means that DeAndre Hopkins, who missed 7 games last year, almost half the season, will miss at least 6 this year. Again, almost half the season. That's a huge, huge disadvantage going into the team. And then what happens on defense? They lost their best player, Chandler Jones, who they let go in free agency. I don't know. I look at the Cardinals and they worry me.
Concern me a lot too, based off of what they did at the end of last year, and also with the way it seems to be going with Kyler Murray right now. Pittsburgh at 23, Peter. I mean, there are a lot of reasons to question if they'll be any good this year. They still have Mike Tomlin. It's still a team that finds its way to be at the very least competitive more times than not. How difficult was it to have the Steelers there at 23?
Not difficult at all. I mean, I think this is right where they should be. Paul, do you realize that even with Ben Roethlisberger, last year this team averaged 20 points a game on offense? That's terrible. It's terrible. And they weren't great, despite having great talent. They weren't great consistently on defense either. I think this stat, I'm pretty sure this is, I should have checked it, but the Steelers played 18 games last year. In 11 of the 18 games, they scored 21 or less. I mean,
Ouch.
that's bad. That's really bad. In today's NFL, when you're paying a quarterback what they're paying Ben Roethlisberger, so I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I don't love having to rely in a good division, which the Steelers are in. I don't love having to rely on, a tenuous quarterback situation, but I like having the Steelers at 23. They could be 19, they could be 28.
Giants at 24, Peter. I mean, that's a team that I think could have been at 28 as well, but you have them at 24.
I think the way I look at the Giants is I probably like Daniel Jones more than most people do. This is year 4 for him in the NFL. I've seen some positive signs with him in his first 3 years, just not enough of them. And this year, he will enter it with, by far, the best help around him. He's got, with Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal as his 2 tackles, with Saquon Barkley behind him, with Kadarius Toney, who worries the heck out of me, and Kenny Golladay as his 2 main receiving targets. That's all around. That's the best that it's been for Daniel Jones. And that's why I think Giants are going to win a few games. I don't know how many, and I don't know if it'll be enough for Daniel Jones, but I like some of what they've done.
I look at the team just behind them, Peter, the Seattle Seahawks at 25, and we're just into baseball season. I grew up a Cubs fan. You kind of had to be at my house, and the mantra every year was, wait till next year. And it feels like Seattle has kind of adopted that in a football kind of way this year.
Kind of a gap year for Seattle, Paul. That's what it feels like. I think they're not going to do something knee-jerk and move heaven and earth to try to get a quarterback. And to me, Baker Mayfield just almost complicates the situation. This is a team that is probably going to have 4 picks in the top 50 or 52 next year, because they have their own in the first and second round, and Denver's in the first or second round. So they're going to be able to address a lot of needs next year, especially at quarterback if need be. If I were Seattle, I would just take my medicine this year and come back strong next year.
Commanders at 26, Peter. What interests you the most about Washington's season?
I think they got a really good offensive line and a really good defensive line, and they got, I don't know about Carson Wentz. I think this is a good thing for Mike Florio said it on his show around the time that Wentz went to Washington. It's the best thing that could have ever happened to him. It's not like he's playing for his dad or his uncle anymore. Doug Peterson, Frank Reich, they're gone. Now he's got to go in and prove himself. And so I think that's good for Carson Wentz. I think he's probably better than we all give him credit for, but and I think he's going to have a decent receiving core. If you look at, led by Terry McLaurin, and they drafted Jahan Dotson, the kid from Penn State. They got Curtis Samuel coming over from Carolina. I think.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.